well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Staying Compliant, Considering Climate Change and ISO Management Systems. I'm Mike Richmond, I'm your host for today's session. And today's session is presented by Kevin Campbell, and Kevin is the Technical Director of DEKRA Audit North America and a Senior Member of ASQ, as well as Dale Isaacs, who is a business owner, as well as the Vice Chair for the US Tag to ISO TC 176. Together, these two industry experts, both of whom, by the way, are lead auditors, are going to walk you through the important amendments that the International Organization for Standardization has brought to key management system standards such as ISO 9001 and ISO 14001 as they relate, of course, to climate change. So, Kevin and Dale, thanks for joining us here today, guys.
Thank you, Mike.
Great to see you. Well, Dale, you're going to get started, I believe, and then you're going to hand it off to Kevin. And if any of you have questions during the session, just use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get them over to Kevin and Dale at the end of the session. So, guys, with that, I'll leave it to you. Take it away.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Mike. And good to be with you, Kevin. First of all, let's take a look at the agenda for this session on climate change and its impact to ISO management system standards. Today, we want to talk about, first of all, some of the fundamentals and the terminology. We'll be throwing around some acronyms, although Kevin and I will try to hold the acronyms to a minimum. It would be good for us to understand what some of the terminology is. Then we'll take a look at the background on how did this amendment come about, when was the change effective, the significance of the change, and then we'll take some practical steps and some audit expectations from a certification body perspective. And then we'll wrap it up with questions and answers at the end. So some of the fundamentals, the relationship between oversight bodies and ISO standards. On the left-hand side of your screen, you can see the IAF, the International Accreditation Forum, is the oversight body that holds all accreditation bodies worldwide to the same standards. Accreditation bodies, of course, audit certification bodies, or CBs. CBs, of course, come in and audit your organization to certify your management systems to established standards. Speaking of standards, ISO on the right-hand side of your screen, the International Organization for Standardization, issues guidance for developing standards. There is a subset of ISO called the Technical Management Board, or TMB, that develops rules and directives for how standards get produced. Standards get produced by technical committees, and they all have different numbers depending on the standard that's being developed. Technical Committee number 176 in the example here is the technical committee that develops ISO 9001, for example. TC 176 develops all of the 9001, all of the 9000 series standards, and all of the 10,000 series of standards that are used in your organization to manage your business. Now, let's take a look at the background of the Climate Change Amendment. Back in September of 2021, ISO issued what has come to be known as the London Declaration to Promote Climate-Related Actions. In a meeting back in September of 2021, ISO committed to work with all of its member countries around the world to promote climate actions through the development of standards. ISO's Technical Management Board, known as the TMB, changed the basic structure for all management system standards. In February of this year, February 23rd, ISO and the TMB published amendments to all existing management system standards to include ISO 9001, ISO 14001, 45001, all of the management system standards this applied to. two new statements of text were added to all of those management system standards. The text was added to the addition. It was added to clauses 4.1 and 4.2 in all of the standards. Not only that, but all of the standards under development were included. Now, when is this change effective and what exactly has changed? Well, ISO's climate change requirements were issued and released as amendments in February of 2024. They were not considered revisions. Because they were issued as amendments, there is no transition period. The transition period began when these amendments were released last February 2024. So let's take a look at what exactly has changed. Clauses 4.1 and 4.2. You'll recognize, of course, 4.1 and 4.2 as context and interested parties. In clause 4.1, context, a shall requirement was issued. You'll recall 4.1 requires organizations to determine what the internal and external issues are that could affect their business. The text that was added states that the organization shall, here comes a requirement. The organization shall determine whether climate change is a relevant issue for your business or not. That's a requirement. In 4.2, a note was added. 4.2, you'll recall, is interested parties managing their needs and expectations. The note that was added says that relevant interested parties can have requirements related to climate change. Kevin? Next slide. There we go. Well, the significance of the change. Okay, what's the significance of the change? The overall intent of the requirements for clauses 4.1 and 4.2 remain unchanged. Those clauses have, since 2015, for most management system standards, already included the need for organizations to consider internal and external issues that can impact the business. Those new inclusions are simply assuring that climate change is considered. Climate change is the only issue in clause 4.1 that's specifically called out. So since 2015, all of the ISO management system standards have always included the need for all issues that could affect the management systems to be considered by the organization, internal and external issues. Think about a significant external issue that has impacted all of us, the pandemic. That was an external issue, and companies should have been considering that as an external issue and how it could affect the business. Of course, some companies have and some companies haven't. But now climate change is specifically called out to be considered. So next, Kevin, some practical steps to take and how audits get effective. Kevin, take it away.
Thanks, Dale. Great job. By the way, and thank you very much for that slide explaining the acronyms so I don't have to. So again, my name is Kevin Campbell. I work with DEKRA. I'm the technical director. And this is going to be relatively short, so we leave plenty of time at the end for your questions, which you can direct to Dale. He'll be happy to answer. So, hey, I wanted to cover, this is the IF, as Dale was talking about, and technical committee. A lot of the references here are going to be made for the guidance that they provided us in auditing. First, as certification bodies, DEKRA is a certification body, as Dale had covered in his second slide. The DEKRA, we're required, and our colleagues are required to ensure that climate change is determined, and this is the key in this slide, is whether it's relevant or not. That's the requirement. Okay, so remember, a lot of and I had addressed this, came out, and like Dale said, in February, pretty much was launching in March. We don't normally. It's the question is it relevant, and then what are you doing about it if it's relevant? If it's not relevant, then did you go through the thought process of determining that? And then we're going to cover a few thoughts, additional support material going next. But the key here is the question: is it relevant or not relevant? I get asked a lot, well, when do you issue an NCR? Well, I would have to sit there and have, we haven't, to the best of my knowledge yet, but I would have to sit there and have a client that jumped up and down and said, no, I will not consider climate change. It was like going, now, as long as you're considering it in the process of and working to it, and making that determination, we shy away from writing any kind of NCRs over this issue. I know we have a lot of auditors on the call, so I did want to make sure if that was one of their first questions that, hey, climate change must be considered. That's the biggest deal. Just like Dale said, nothing else changed. You have to consider it. And the people that made this change, so you know, they thought that, hey, climate, certified organizations should have already been considering this. And many of them will find out already have, because it's already touched their business in one way or the other. I wanted to touch, we have a side for the certified, for the clients or the certified organizations here. And the one thing I wanted to touch about this, and this is out of the IFTC decision log, we can provide the references for that. But if you'll notice, all of these are dealing with, and it's based out of the risk-based methodology that came out with the new version of the ISO standard. And it was like going and determining that climate change aspects and risks within the development, maintenance, and effectiveness. But if you look at the second paragraph, again, it talks about should be termed relevant in the scope of the management evaluation of risk. And I'm going to you're going to hear this again and again from me within the scope of the management system standards. So you want to know the standard and your scope. You're not solving climate change with this. Okay. You are sitting there looking at your standard, whether it be quality or like Dale refers to it as business management system, or your environmental management system, or your occupational health and safety management system, or your energy management system. And again, they accentuate this because remember, 4.1 and 4.2 are specifically called out in 611 for your risk and opportunities. So it's about risk. I'm going to end this with when I do it, but it's always about risk. And the people that best know about risk are the people that are in the business. You know whether it's a risk or not to you. So again, I will accentuate this and say it over and over again. Remember to stick to it. You're not solving the world's problems. You're looking at your standard and your scope of certification and how that can be impacted by climate change. Again, it was like the expectations on certified companies. I just want to make sure that we were talking about the other differences that can come in. If you're in a different industry, it's definitely going to be different. There's a big difference if you're a coal burning plant, energy plant, between another organization that provides, let's say, consulting services. And depending on what you're consulting on, of course, too. But the industry matters, your geographical location matters, what your standard is. They're all going to impact this determination of whether climate change is relevant for you. And ultimately, the client needs to make that determination. We're here to sit there and verify that you went through the process, and we're going to give some support information later on in here. But again, there's no one right answer. Okay, what industry are you in? What standard are we referring to? Where are you located? It's a big difference sometimes if your customers, where's your customer base? If your customer base is in Europe, big difference. If you're located in California, big difference in some other states might have it being done. So all of these things go into that decision on whether it's relevant. And again, I'll accentuate the requirement, like Dale stated initially, the requirement is it relevant? and then it's important. Again, consider your standard and the scope of your certification. I wanted to bring this slide up just to send a message. So if you don't know who an SEC is, it's a U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. They're the ones that sort of regulate your financial disclosures that you make, especially if you're on the stock exchange. I don't know if you've had, but conflict minerals was one of the things that they passed years ago, where you had to make sure your minerals weren't coming out of some slave, were obtained less various means. Let's put it that way. But on the Security Exchange Commission has actually required climate-related disclosures for investors. And if you look at the information they provide, they're wanting to know the effect that climate change has on your strategy, results, and operations, what effect it might have on a business model, and your outlook for your stock, because you're talking to investors, how you communicate to investors. And then it was, and at the end, it was, they're talking about, and tell me, does this not sound familiar? Climate-related risk. Where have I heard that one before, right? It was like going and mitigation strategies, right? It was like, and so they're ripping a page right out of the ISO toolbox, right? And what my real intention with this slide is, this is not an ISO thing. Like, climate change is not an ISO thing, even though we may think of it. It may be driven more important in certain countries than others. There are more regulations on some countries or states than others, but it's not going away. And it's something that you're going to have to look at this year. You're going to have to look at next year. And it's going to continuously, like this SEC is just one example, but states are passing it. The laws that sitting there is talking about renewable energy, amount of renewable energy use, the amount of recycled material you use, can all have implications in climate change. Usually they're initiated for those reasons. Farmers, like I talked about, the changes in industry. So my message to you is, it's not an ISO thing, okay? It was like going, you should be considering this. Like Dale had talked about the context of the organization. The context of the organization is a forward-looking section of the standard. It was initially created with a new standard to sit there and get companies to look forward. Where's their place in the world? What are they doing next? And what's coming at them next? So even though climate change may not be relevant, I just had an audit earlier this week where the client made a very good case that it's not relevant to them at this moment, quote unquote, at this moment in time. But they do see possibilities that it could be coming down their age. It basically told me, hey, they had considered this and they had made a determination. I was good with that. So it was like going, and what you consider climate change is still somewhat debatable. I'm in Florida, and it was like we just had a hurricane. A lot of people are blaming that on climate change or some kind of indication of it. Well, we've been having the hurricanes long before, man ever struck a match. So it was like going, so, now the intensity, but it was, and that's what they're looking at really. And I can give you the definition. I was talking about it before of what the United Nations defines as climate change, which are the long-term shifts in temperature and weather patterns. And that's what you really have to look at when you consider if it's relevant. I wanted to sit there and go on the auditors, touch base on our auditors that might be listening. But this is other additional guidance that the auditors, first of all, again, as Dale said, as I stated, DEKRA has to do it. We are going to have to sit there. The auditors are going to have to ask. They're going to have to, they want to know, they're going to have to verify and say, how did you reach that determination? That doesn't mean the auditor is the expert on climate change. Okay. It was like going, how climate change is impacting your business you should be the expert on it. And then communicate that, elaborate at that, and how your determination of whether it is relevant or not. And like I touched on before for a moment, DEKRA is in 70 different countries. It has 50,000 employees, and it's almost in every kind of business that has anything to do with safety, security, or sustainability. And the stuff I see that's going on around the world is it's head turning. They're going for laws where huge organizations, if you stop and think nowadays, huge organizations, there's very few organizations in the world today that are large that don't issue a sustainability report. If you go to their website, you'll sit there and they're going to talk about things relevant to climate change. Well, guess, gravity works and we know stuff rolls downhill, right? It was like going, if they're doing it up there, guess what they're going? They're going to their suppliers. And their suppliers are going to go to their suppliers. And their suppliers are going to go to theirs. And that supply chain issue. So again, like I told on the back one, this isn't going away. And always remember, but you can't sit there and go try and solve the world's problems. Look at your standard and your certification scope, and how might climate change be able, impact that scope. And the scope should reflect your activities. And the bottom line on any certification, what it means is your ability to meet your customers' requirements. And if that climate change has an impact on those activities, it very well may have an impact on you meeting your customers' requirements. So I just thought, hey, things to consider, like we talked about. This is a summary slide. I told you I was going to be short, right? So it was like a summary. The DEKRA audit team will be looking to ensure climate change has been considered. It is a requirement of the standard. We have to sit there and do it. If you want to stay as a certified organization, you have to consider it, whether it's relevant or not. I hate to keep on repeating, but Dale said it right at the beginning. That's the only change on whether it's relevant or not. And so what we did, and we at DEKRA, when this came out, we sent out notices to our clients. We sent out notices to our auditors. A lot of the material that you're looking at right now was in my auditor training that I provided. It was like going, so this has been around pretty much. We were issued a RFI right by ANAB the week after this was released, the amendment was released. They were witnessing an audit, and the auditor did not ask what if the client had considered climate change. And I said, literally, it came out last week. Are you kidding me? And it's effective immediately. And Dale marked that. It was effective immediately. It was like going, no, you got no timeout. And they came up past go. In ours, I told them, it was like in our system, we tell the client in our ISO audit report template, we tell the client, just in case, that, hey, this is an issue, this is a requirement, right in the opening meeting. And in the closing meeting, the auditor verifies that the client's considered climate change. Again, it was like, and so I'm going to go through and what you might consider. And again, there's a wealth of information, not only on the SEC website, IAF website, if you want additional information. And of course, as I said, if you have any questions, Dale will be happy to answer them. But let's just look at what, if we were looking at it, and this is not an unexpected list for any relevant issue, but you should be looking at issues that might disrupt your operations. Hey, if climate change that sits there, we could talk about it. Was like going, if there is, like I had talked about, shifts in temperatures and weather patterns that are disrupting your operations or your suppliers' operations, they might be a result of climate change. There might be an impact with climate change. Your customers, and probably the biggest one is the third bullet point, is the regulatory and policy changes. As I stated before, this isn't going away. The customers, the big companies in the world are issuing sustainability reports. Well, guess where they get that information from? They go to their suppliers. They go sit there and go, hey, how are we doing on this? Anything from energy usage. Of course, there's increased costs as material is being required to be maybe a certain percentage as being renewable, so from renewable sources. that could drive cost into your supply chain and actually create supply chain vulnerabilities. But just like the standard says risks and opportunities, there's also opportunities here too. You can sit there, maybe something that I told you about. There's companies or stock groups that just invest in climate-friendly companies. Let's put it that way. Companies that are green, that take climate change into consideration, and are taking strong action on those. They that may actually impact, your ability to get finance, or your ability to take advantages of shifts in market. I know for a fact some of the companies, very large companies in the EU now only will take renewable materials, especially in packaging, materials in packaging that are from renewable sources. That means they came from a farm or they were recycled. And it was like going, so it's created opportunities, and it's also risk for those that have not identified those. So I would sit there and say, hey, if you haven't thought about it, it's time to consider climate change. I was like going, so, and so what do we do if we do say it's relevant? We do the same thing we do for everything else. If something's relevant, remember 4.1, as I said earlier, 4.1 and 4.2 are called out in 6.1.1 on risk and opportunities. That's where you say, hey, this is a relevant thing. And then what are we going to do about it? Are you establishing objectives to meet it? Again, we identify a risk, we analyze the risk, prioritize the risk, develop, just like we did on the SEC slide I showed you, and the ISO mitigation measures. We monitor, review, communicate, and training, engagement, collaboration. And remember, doesn't go away again. This is something that if you go through the standard, and we'll sit there and you go to 6, then you're going to go into 8. And then after that, you're going to roll it out and review it again in management review. So it was like going, so every year you should be sitting there, the client should be sitting there looking at saying, hey, is this an issue? Because it may not have been relevant. Might not be relevant this year. Next year it might be. It's something that just like, and I liked how Dale brought up an excellent example. I've walked into clients where half of their organization was wiped out with the pandemic, and you go to their management review or their issues, and you're seeing, hey, is the pandemic on here? You've had time. You've had time now. It was like, what are you doing when you can't work here? What's your plans? What are you going to do? Because the biggest point, like I said before, the ISO certification is a certification of trust. It's letting the suppliers know that the company, the organization that is certified, letting their customers know they can trust them. They can trust them to get their purchase order, comply with their requirements and their flow downs, and deliver their product in the quality or means they flow down and on time. So I'll leave it at that. And then, just a takeaway again, it's about risk. And the best ones to determine that risk are the people that actually run the company. It's their skin. It's their skin in the game. The auditors, I'd shy away from telling a company, no, this is a significant risk, unless you really got something to stand on. Unless it's a flow down from a client that they have, a customer they have, or if they have some regulatory or means that they're not identifying that needs to be identified. But it should be the certified organization sitting there assessing this risk. Okay, so, and then I will leave the questions to you, Dale. Go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Kevin. Yeah, as a matter, Kevin, I'll get you back for this. But as a matter of fact, I was looking at the Q&A board that has been submitted, and I can help out with quite a few of these. Kevin, you have control of the slides. Go to slide number 2. Yeah. In the presentation, it's someone asked, Can you show the acronyms
Yep.
again? The next slide, Kevin.
Oh, the next one. Oh, I'm sorry. That's
There you go. There
you
you
did
go.
say slide
There you go.
two. I was counting. I was counting the title.
There you go. So there's the acronyms. I know we've got not only does ISO have a bunch of acronyms, but our individual companies do. By the way, I think Mike, you said that this presentation will be available for download or
It
something
it
later.
it it,
So
it will be, yes, and that is a question we always get from a lot of the folks that are asking questions. Yes, if you have registered for this event, certainly if you're watching it live, you'll have a chance to get the recording. We'll send that out to all of you via email. So everyone who's watching, you'll get a recording.
perfect, perfect. So there are the acronyms. You can take a screenshot of that right now, or you
Mhm.
can download the presentation later. There was another question that says, I have ISO 9000, the ISO 9001 standard, and I do not see those two comments under 4.1 and 4.2 that Dale presented. Kevin, if you could go to slide number 4. There you go, right there, right there. Look at the second bullet from the top. Okay, the second bullet of the top is how ISO 9001, and this applies also whether you're using 14,001, 45,001, any of the management system standards. Um, there is an Amendment 1, 2024, attached to the back of the standards. So if I have had my copy of the standard since 2015, the amendment's not going to be in there. It's issued as an amendment. You can go to iso.org and you can download the amendment. It's available. Last I checked, it was available free of charge.
That's my understanding too.
There you go. I've got another question, Kevin. Is it about how climate change affects the business or how the business activities affect climate change or both? The answer to that question is yes. I see. I've been an auditor for several years, and I know how you guys answer these questions when we ask them. Uh, yeah, it's about in clause 4.2. It talks about the needs and expectations of interested parties. So it's how climate change could potentially impact my business, or how my business could impact interested parties vis-a-vis climate change. Let's see, the next question on there. Let's see, is there a fact-based list of things that cause climate change? Kevin, I'm going to let you take that one because I'm not familiar of a single list that is available anywhere on the planet that causes climate change.
Yeah,
But
I would, for ideas on it, we had talked about anything that, again, is affected by our long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. But what actually causes climate change is up for debate. That was like going, they have it. Like I said in mine, I live in Florida. We just finished with a big hurricane. Some people are drawing that to climate change, but we've had hurricanes before that and even worse ones that went in there. But there are a lot of, let's see, support material you can look at. And it is by that IPC. I looked at the UN actually having it. The SEC actually gives you stuff that they consider relevant climate change issues or what cause it, that on that SEC slide that I showed you about, and you just type in SEC and climate change and it'll come right up. And then other ones, of course, DEKRA website also has a announcement on climate change and some of the issues that I talked about, and some additional text related on what you might want to do as far as impacts go. And of course, our IAF website, right? And my friend Dale over there is on ISO TC 176, which has dash TF 477 auditing climate change issues in ISO 9000 for review, right? And it was like, oh, so there's a lot of information, but a cold, hard list. No, I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, the Kevin also attached to that same question, what constitutes a valid response? Does the response need to be documented in a physical form? Where is it acceptable?
That's good questions. Those are good questions.
Yeah.
So what was the first one there? Because he has a bunch of questions.
What constitutes a valid response?
Okay, a valid response is no, we determine it relevant, or no, we've determined it not relevant. I was like, that is the requirement. Like Dale started me off, he set me up, and I drove it home. So if that auditor cannot get an answer out of you on whether climate change, if you consider climate change relevant or not relevant, it's not going to end well. Right? It was like going, and then it was like going, now, what constitute a valid response? Like any issue, you said, and I gave an example of how a client, a very large client of mine, where you could sit there and say, hey, they have some issues or some things that are climate change related, but they're saying, no, we don't. We have no flow downs from our customers, for climate change issues. We've got no issues with our suppliers providing this. We've got no regulatory requirements going through it. And then that list I gave in this presentation at the end, where you sat there and just said, because and I hope I tried to communicate it well, depending on your industry, your geographical location, what your actual activities are, but it was like going, but what things that are affected, the weather that could cause operational disruptions that are due to, again, and I'll bring it up again, the definition, long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. So it was like going, so some of these would be talking about, some of the worst things I've read about, at least for climate change, are islands that are literally sinking now. Right? They're no longer, they're getting covered by water. I don't think a lot of us are privy to that. But it was like, but you might also be looking at, for instance, you have health impacts on the workforce. We're hearing year after year that it's getting warmer. All right. So it was like going, is that going to affect the health of your workers if you have an open air manufacturing plant or a warehouse or something like that? Is that going to? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Again, like I said, it's all about risk and the client's assessment of that risk. And what I think about it most often is, if you're a certified client, ISO 9000, 1445, read your scope. I was like, does anything that possibly could be affected by climate change affect you from delivering your product, or does it promote it and doing it? For instance, I had said before, probably be hard pressed if I go to a coal-fired electricity plant, right? And they say they have no climate change, they're not relevant. Climate change is not relevant to them. And I would be easy to get there because coal plants have so much regulation now. It was like going that is related to climate change, but it was, but again, it was like going, they can sit there. One of the things they brought out in those guidance documents is, hey, stick to your standard. If you're talking about quality, you're talking about the quality of your product, your ability to deliver your product or get your materials in to build your product. If you're talking about 14,001, which is environmental management system, hey, we're talking about environmental aspects and impacts, right? We're going to sit there and look at your scope and then sit there and say, hey, you've already made a determination of environmental aspects and impacts. What are those? Are any of those related to climate change? And I was like going, and the same, like I just brought up, occupational health and safety. One of the things you might be concerned with hey, is this a climate change issue with the temperature rising? Hey, it used to be I didn't used to have to face these days with this kind of temperature, this hot. So is this something I have to sit there and go change my environment, the operation, your environmental operation? Again, climate change, it can get dicey, and that's what I'm putting in this amendment. But I think what it's going to do is continually, and you'll see it build, just like anything else. This was released in February, March, the beginning. A much more stricter definition of what is and isn't climate change. You're going to see a much more uh, connecting of the dots. You're going to see a lot more flow downs in purchase orders, or it might be even your client, your customer saying, no, I want to make sure this product is, has been made with 50% renewable energy or something. It was like going, and how you do that, that would be a climate related, impact, right? And you would sit there and you could actually do that and say, hey, this is what we're doing about it. This is the risk. This is what we did to mitigate it. And this is what we're doing going forward. On the other hand, like I said, on the side, you can sit there and say, I got nothing for you. I've gone through everything and I've looked at my costs, my supply chain, my operational disruption. I have no regulations or policy that I can relate to climate change. I don't see any opportunities or risks as far as market shifts go. We've tried to just make you a list of things that you should consider for when they go up to against your certification scope of activities and what your standard is, where the area you are, just like I covered in the previous slides. Where's your geographic area? What industry are you in?
Yeah, Kevin, I think it's important to point out the slide that you have up right now. That slide is not an exhaustive list of all the possibilities that exist on planet Earth. There may be some that are not included in this list. Kevin's just giving a list of things to trigger some thoughts. I think I can knock out several of the questions. There were several questions about, hey, does the response need to be documented? Well, I also chair the International Committee for 9001 Interpretations. And if you look at 4.1 in your standard, nowhere in 4.1 that I recall does it say the organization shall retain documented information on context of the business. Now be careful because that will circle around to get you later, because in management review, 9.3.2b, I'm reading from ISO 9001. 932b says that you have to include changes in the internal and external issues. And at the end of 9.3.3, it says that the organization shall retain records as evidence of management review, since discussion on changes in internal and external issues form one of the inputs into management review. Then you have to document it there, not under 4.1 or 4.2. And so I think that knocks out several questions right there.
I would sit there and say, so just like you talked about with circling back, a lot of times, and I have clients say, oh, there's no requirement to document that. And I'll say, yeah, that's correct. There's no requirement to document it. But there is a requirement for them to do it. So they're going to have to, somehow they're going to have to sit there and explain how they do their issues and their requirements. And they need and the larger the organization, it's easier if it's very small, they're not doing much there. But they get a larger organization and to sit there and talk about all the issues and interested parties, it becomes a list. And then, and that's supposed to drive you to what you're doing in 6.1.1, which goes through 8 to get to 9. But it was go ahead and do.
There you go. Yeah. So one of the questions,
Well, Dale,
Kevin.
before you get
Yeah,
to that,
yeah,
I'm sorry. Let me
Mike.
just jump in real quickly. I wanted to let everyone know we got 15 minutes before the top of the hour. We could go a little long if the guys can, but we have a lot of questions. We have 19 questions still in queue, so we won't get to all the questions, and I apologize for that. But we will answer all your questions if you have them. We'll answer them for you after the event via email if we don't get to them live on air. So continue to send questions on, and then. Dale, you let me know. I mean, I'm gonna probably poke back in at the top of the hour and just start wrapping it up, but we'll get to as many as we can and we'll go from there. So Dale, take it back away. Sorry.
Perfect, Mike. Thank you very much. Let me speak quickly here because we're short in time. Um, the annexes, like this slide, Kevin, you have an Annex 1 and an Annex 2. One of the viewers said, "Hey, where are the annexes from? Is that just part of this presentation?"
That is actually on our notifications that we sent to our auditors and our clients. So we had a letter explaining the change, and we attached an Annex 1 and Annex 2.
So that's
And
a
then each
DEKRA
one of these,
specific.
yeah,
That's a
yes,
DEKRA
and
specific
yeah,
document.
yes, and these operational disruptions, it has a further explanation of those. So you can always make a request, whoever that is, and we could provide it to them.
There you go. Let's see. There was a question during an audit. We got a non-conformance because we weren't documenting something. Not even on the interpretation committee am I allowed to answer a dispute between a certification body and the client. All certification bodies per ISO 17021 are required to have an appeals process. So if you don't agree with what one of your auditors finds, you're welcome to appeal that. Let's see.
I
One
hope
of
that
the
wasn't a DEKRA client.
no, 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 no. We've got clients for all kinds of certification bodies on the call, I believe. Let's see. Assuming risks and opportunities apply, financial savings, reducing carbon footprint. I'm not sure what the question is on that one, but in the next version of 9001, I can speak to that a little bit. There's what we intend to do is separate risks apart from opportunities, decoupling those two so that people are doing a pretty good job, Kevin, of focusing on risks to the business or risks to my process. What we're not doing such a good job of is and what opportunities exist for the business. So you'll see more of that coming up in the future. Let's see. Are all certification bodies required to consider the amendment, or are there any exceptions? No, every certification body is required to consider the amendments in 4.1 and 4.2. Let's see, what's the best way to show that we comply with this? A risk analysis? Do we have to add it to the interested parties? That was one of the questions. Again, some of these questions will be company specific, so neither Kevin nor I can tell you exactly what is and what is not relevant. The requirement is that you consider whether climate change is relevant or not. I paraphrase. And so the only way, I think, Kevin, you got this question early on, how would I get a non-conformance? The only way I think, and Kevin, you can correct me, but I think the only way you could get a non-conformance is if the auditor asks you, have you considered climate change? And your reply is what?
We
Kevin?
actually, and we'll try and work. We try and work with our clients and tell them like, "Hey, can you consider it?" I was like, "Oh, but like I said earlier, especially, and we haven't had one yet with the client saying, "No, I won't consider it." Now it was like going now. Normally, if we, like I said, we put in our opening meeting and our closing meeting. The opening meeting, we're telling them this is a requirement because it's still new. It's still this is probably the first audit that they have that's considered it. So it was like going, but yeah, if they don't consider it, they have to get NC. They have to be, the non-conformance has to be issued.
Yeah, there's another question, Kevin, that says initially auditors were more inclined to write an opportunity for improvement because a lot of customers did not have the amendment. They were unaware of the requirement.
Right,
Um,
exactly. And just so you know, that was my direction to my auditors when this came out in March, right? So normally it was like going, we would sit there and flag, just like I told you, A&AB wrote me up. It's called an RFI. It's a request for information where I have to answer it. But I had to sit there and say, hey, okay, this is what we're doing about this. But it was like going exactly guidance that we've given our auditors. Hey, we're giving you a heads up. Here you go. It's coming to a theater near you. And just as I tried to send the message, I know we're short on time, so I'll make it brief. But I tried to send a message across that I hope everybody gets. It's not just an ISO thing. This is a world thing. It's like and it's not going away. Regulations are going to be added. Things are going to get going. But yes, it was like going. We recommend that our auditors, if it's their first audit, they first had it on this. They didn't get their notice, which we sent them. The opening meeting. Normally, in an opening meeting, they can sit there. Between the opening and closing meeting, they can consider that issue.
yeah. So one of the other questions, Kevin, is that are the amendments mature enough that ANAB will require writing a minor nonconformance for noncompliance? The the climate change amendments were effective on February 23rd, 2024. So that means on February the 24th, certification bodies were required to write a nonconformance if the organization had not considered climate change. And I like the way, Kevin, that you put it. Um, all it says is, have you considered whether climate change is applicable to your business or not? Yep, we considered it and it's not. And here's how we went about that. It's not applicable today. It may be applicable tomorrow. And I think, Kevin, that's really
That's exactly what I was trying to say too. I had an audit this week on it. Same thing happened. As they going, the client was aware of it. Wasn't like they missed the boat. And then and it was like going, we try and work with our clients, letting them know, hey, coming to a theater near you. And it was like going, and so that was exactly it. And they were able to do their reasoning on why it's not applicable to them now or not relevant to them now.
Yeah, so I've got several questions that deal with other standards that might not be familiar to everyone. 17025 for calibration.
Calibration.
Yep.
That isn't applicable. These are management system. And actually, this is a better one for you, Dale. Right? It was like going, the amendments are written to management system standards.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And so there are some questions about, hey, if our product is software, do we have to consider climate change? Does climate change affect ISO 27001? If it is a management system standard, then it is applicable. If there is a clause in 4.1 that's called understanding the organization and its context, and it's a management system standard. There are also guidance standards. This is not applicable to a guidance standard. It is applicable to all management system standards.
That includes information security, which is 27001.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Let's see. I see some questions on animal feed producing industries, feed safe standards, hybrid ISO and GMP standards, and how will the supply chain be affected by climate change? Again, some of these are fairly company specific, and if I give a recommendation, then I'm no longer a neutral third party auditor. Then I have gone into the area of consulting, and consulting has some other implications to it. So I'm going to skate on a couple of these, but we'll go back and we'll answer all of the questions that have been submitted. I'm trying to go pretty quick. We've only got 5 minutes left. Something about states banning climate change. Let's see, can 9001 be integrated with 14001? Absolutely. Good environmental policy in ISO 14001 is just good business.
Yes.
Good safety and health practices, ISO 45001, that is just good business.
Yes.
50001, energy, that is just
Yes.
good business. So the answer to all of those questions is yes. And if it's a negative,
We have numerous clients that are 9, 14, 45, and 50.
right, right.
And it was like going in climate change, and that was what I was trying to make in my presentation. Climate change may impact those standards in a different way, or they could be all encompassing.
Yeah,
You know,
I got another question. Not to hurry you, Kevin. We've got 4 minutes left.
right? No, I'm good.
Yeah, were registrars supposed to send out the notification of change to the standard to their customers? Kevin, what did you guys do at DEKRA?
We sent out a notice of change to all our customers. We
Okay.
also sent it out to our auditors, and we had specific this training. Some of this training that you're seeing, I pulled right out of my auditor webinar training that I do.
Yeah, many of the certification bodies, many of the CBs that I know personally, all of them sent out
Yeah.
some type of a notification.
17021, which is what we're accredited to, and the other CBs are, it's required that you keep your clients informed of any changes in the standard. So there was so they know every CB I know would have a policy for that, some kind of policy where they're going to send their clients out notifications.
There you go. I've had several questions on ISO 13485. That's ISO 9001 used in
Medical devices.
medical devices.
So by the way, just so I will, that is the only one that I do that as at least as of I haven't checked recently, but there was no amendment to it.
Right. I think, and you guys can all, I'm sure I'm going to misspeak on this one, but I think 13485 is currently lined up with the 2008 version of 9001, not 2015.
Yeah, it didn't roll into the harmonized versions, right?
Yeah,
So now we have to actually, for our clients that are 13485, we literally have to do additional audit duration to add 9001. Still not a lot of change, differences. But the amendment, as far as I know, the amendment did not get over to 13485. So
yeah,
it's
because
not
there is no such thing as context and interested parties, to my knowledge. Let's see. I've got some other questions on how does this class count towards CE credits? I can't answer that question.
Yes,
Mike, you can take that.
absolutely.
You
Yes,
can respond to that one later.
Yep, absolutely. Those folks that are watching this can claim CPD, CEU for this as part of your continuing education.
Perfect. I've got we just completed a recertification audit last week. We had taken climate change into consideration. The auditor marked an opportunity for improvement. Depending on who you are, there are some certification bodies and some registration schemes that expressly forbid giving opportunities for improvement because that could be considered consulting, and consulting is a violation of ISO 17021 that applies to certification bodies. But every CB has their own.
Actually, just so you know, on opportunities for improvement, you always have a line, and we have to battle that line all the time. But the position of A and AB is they would like opportunities for improvement. I can still give you an opportunity without consulting you. Now they do have they had a lot of like going, or somebody had said it was like, hey, once you start getting over 4 or 5 opportunities for improvement, you're starting to go through that gray area. Also, it depends on how the opportunity for improvement is worded. So we get audited on those. We're expected to give our client a couple, and some may just be, hey, like if I tell you you comply with the standard, but hey, it really could help on organizing your documents a little better so that we can get through this faster, or something, or you had problems actually finding the answer for what I had, or there's a lot of things like that. We're not consulting. We're just sitting there saying, hey, this is probably out of your stuff. This is probably someplace you should be looking at.
Yeah, Kevin, that's where I would issue a potential risk to the business that, hey, you guys have not considered a pandemic to be
Yes.
applicable to your business. Well, you're not required to, yes or no, but that
Right.
could, as all of us on planet Earth have seen in the last 4 or 5 years, that's definitely an external issue that could affect your business. But at the end of the day, 9001 and all management system standards are written in an open format so that it applies to a manufacturing company, it applies to aerospace, it applies to a law practice, an accounting practice, a CPA firm, a hospital, USDA. It applies crops. It applies. It can apply to everything. So there we go.
And I
Mike, I
think
see we're over
I was
time.
gonna say, I think that's a perfect place to put a pin in it, wrap it up, because we're a little over our time. We've got a lot of questions still to go. We could do this for another hour with the guys, but we've got to go.
That's
But
good. That's good.
thank you both, Kevin, Dale. That was a really great session. I mean, a lot of great information. I think everyone out there really got a lot out of it. I know I did as well. But yeah, you can certainly continue to send us questions. A lot of you are going to watch this on demand as opposed to live. So you can write us at Exemplar Global at info@exemplarglobal.org if you have questions. We'll get them to Dale and Kevin and the teams. Or you can just continue to send questions in this way, and we'll get them to them that way as well. So guys, thanks again for a really great session. Really appreciated that. We'll see you guys all later. Thanks for being here again. We'll have another Exemplar Global live event coming up for you shortly. So stick around or stay tuned for that.
Hey, thank you, Mike. And thank you for having us, Mike. And thank you, Dale, and everybody else that had time to join. We appreciate it.
We do.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike. And just for the record, I want to be like Kevin when I grow old.
I want to be like Kevin when I grow young.
Talk to you later, buddy.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thank you all for being here. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.